Meenakshi Shedde. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's a very great honor for me to be here. Thank you so much, Mark, for inviting me. Thanks to ICD, and thank you so much for making the effort to come. I'm really going to chat in a very kind of informal way. I don't think Bollywood needs to be sitting up there. I think it rather needs to be mucking about between us. And then I'd rather make it sort of like a Q&A and, make it a bit lively if possible. I think I'd like to really start with the Bollywood connection with Berlin, which might relate to a lot of you here, and then maybe open up the discussion a little bit. Basically, I've been working with Berlin for like about 10 years now, and it's interesting for me to sort of examine the journey of Bollywood here. But I'd like to start off with a film we had last year. I don't know if some of you would have seen it. It was a big Bollywood film called My Name is Khan. Raise your hands, anyone who saw it at all? Yeah. Okay. So I'll just describe it briefly for those who haven't. It's a film that was made by a hardcore Bollywood director called Karan Johar, who really represents the heart of Bollywood. And it's very interesting because it was a Hollywood co-produced Bollywood film. So it's Fox Studios Worldwide that co-produced this Bollywood film in Bombay. And it's really, really interesting because it represents the Muslim viewpoint post 9/11 in America, which you wouldn't have thought was the last thing on Bollywood lovers' minds. But what was interesting about this film is that it brought the two together. And for me, it was really interesting to be here among the audience in Berlin watching the film. And when I spoke to a colleague later, he said, this film is an important handshake between India and the West. He saw it as that significant. He didn't see it as one more Bollywood film. And this is a regular German guy. I mean, he is a filmmaker and stuff, so he's film savvy. But he really saw this film as really significant, even in a kind of political, socio-political space, which I don't think it was seen in India as like having that kind of significance. In fact, when people read about this, they sort of like, kind of, But clearly they have different resonances in different cultures. And briefly, the story is about a slightly autistic guy in India who moves to the US and then marries this Indian divorcee who's got a son. And when they marry, she changes her name to Khan. His name is Khan. And then through some incident in the school in the schoolyard, when the kid's playing with the other kids, he gets beaten up, and completely by accident. They didn't intend to thrash him to death, but unfortunately he dies. And then the wife is so distraught, and she says that that I've lost my child only because you're Muslim, and your name is Khan, which is how my son got acquired a Muslim name Khan, and was therefore victimized, basically in a kind of racist incident. So he's completely shocked because, of course, it wasn't intentional. And he says he tries to make up for it. And because he's aware of the whole paranoia against Muslims in the US post 9/11, he says, I'll tell the president that my name is Khan and I'm not a terrorist. And the whole story, the rest of the second half is kind of pretty severely idiotic, but has this powerful message about, in a very Bollywood way, of his journey actually to meet the President Obama. There's a kind of lookalike, a TV lookalike. He gets to meet him finally and says, my name is Khan and I'm not a terrorist. And I think that was a very important viewpoint to put across because, increasingly in post 9/11, in different cultures, we have really not very nice resonances about what a Muslim must be, etc., including in India very much. And what this guy said to me in Berlin is that he said what was really intelligent about the film is to put a completely political viewpoint, but packaged so much in a Bollywood film with a lot of romance, and there was also like a wedding song and dance and all of that, and really through the vehicle of a big Bollywood star, that made it very different from some hi-fi, diplomatic discussion between diplomats about how Muslims should or should not be treated post 9/11. And because it was in this really popular vehicle, it really got around the world. And because it was Fox, I think it gave the film access to international markets in a way that Bollywood in itself may not have. So, for example, that film was apparently released in Germany with 30 prints dubbed in German, which is shocking and unheard of for a Bollywood film because you'd have, I don't know, do you usually see them with dubbed or subtitles when you see them here? Is it dubbed when you see a Bollywood? It's usually dubbed. So this one was apparently like hardcore, like a full-on looking at a German market, not like two sidey prints which go circulating to 10 theaters across Germany. And then it had another 30 prints in Poland, dubbed in Polish. And this guy, the main I understand from speaking to distributors of Bollywood films in Germany, there's a big company called Rapid Eye Movies, headed by a guy called Stefan Hall, who sort of developed this niche for Asian films in Germany and also Bollywood. And he said it's not so much a Bollywood market as a Shah Rukh Khan specific market. So you have these other Khans and the other sexy women who turn up, and they really don't cut so much ice with the Berlin as a Shah Rukh Khan. And what was terribly funny to me last year when I was hanging around in the the milling crowds, the Berlin crowds that came to see the film, and a year ago they also had another Shah Rukh Khan film called Om Shanti Om, which is another big film also in the Berlin. Well, big fan there, I guess. And what was very moving for me actually, it was bloody cold, it was snowing like mad, and there were these two women whom I met ironically that the first year, and then I met them again, and she said, "I've seen you before," and I said, "Yes, we have met before." And she was a woman, I remember her name clearly, it was Elka Kologa. She was like almost in her 50s, late 40s. She was a nurse in Hamburg. She had 3 grown-up children who were teenage children, and she says, "I'm really in love with Shah Rukh Khan." And what was interesting to me, she's not this giddy-headed 14-year-old teenager in love with a Bollywood star, but she was like heavy-duty mom and whatnot. And she actually came back the second year. So she had actually worked a whole week of day and night shifts at the hospital where she worked, so she could get 3 days off to come to Berlin to see Shah Rukh Khan, whom she was in love with. This really impressed me because a lot of maneuvering to manage that. And the second year when I saw her for My Name is Khan, she said, "You remember me?" She said, "Of course." I said, "Of course." And she said that this time her daughter, she felt much better because her daughters, two teenage daughters, also love Shah Rukh Khan. And her son is really embarrassed that she loves Shah Rukh Khan. But she says she has the support of her daughters and she felt much better about that. And the other couple that I talked to, I mean, there were like dozens I talked to, was a guy in his 60s from Munich who had driven his wife over all the way to Berlin to meet Shah Rukh Khan because she was in love with him. It was a kind of Valentine's Day present. And I was so moved by this. I really, so for me this is really special because he's clearly connecting at different levels and different kinds of population, different cities. And it's really not just a teenage gang that you'd normally imagine is in love with this sexy guy. So these are sort of mirrors for me of where it has reached. And just to go back to when we started, so when I first started programming I don't program, I sort of recommend films, and they have a selection committee here choosing films which include all Indian films, including Bollywood. And it was a bit of a gamble whether we could program a Bollywood film or not. This is like 10 years ago, like in the early 90s. And I wasn't sure, and personally I have to say, I'm not necessarily a big fan of everything that comes out of Bollywood. There's loads of trash. But for me that's okay because Hollywood also has loads of trash. So for me, they're both equally trashy. One's not a higher trash than the other. So I don't necessarily admire all of it, but I do respect it hugely because you can't not respect, I think, a cinema that's really, personally for me, the most powerful in the world. In that, so of course you're probably aware that Indian cinema makes the most films in the world. I mean, it's like a lunatically prolific country. We make about 5,000 films a year at least. About 1,300 feature films every year, which is insane already. Just to give you a sense of perspective, like Hollywood makes like roughly half our number of films, which is like about 500, maybe 600 in a good year. France makes half of that, which is like 215 a year. And you Germans and all are like, I can't even count. I don't even think you cross 3 digits. It's probably, I don't know, maybe 90-ish, 100-ish, maybe, something like that, right? I don't know. It's clearly rarely crosses into 3 digits. So it's a hugely prolific industry. And to give you a sense of perspective within India, out of these 1,300 feature films that we make every year, not more than about 250 or so are Bollywood, which is just a slang for Hindi films made in Bombay. Mainstream films, I should say. So it's not more than a quarter or 1/5 of our production, but it's hugely, as you would know, of course, hugely much more resonant around the world than Indian films in other languages. And we have a very strong tradition of art house films as well in many, many languages. I think 2 things that make me really proud is that Hollywood has been present in India. Well, our film actually goes back almost to the invention of cinema itself. So cinema was invented in 1895, and in about 1 or 2 years we were already making films in India. When they had these, like the Lumiere brothers who invented film, in 1895 in December, and they showed it at a little hotel in Paris. And they were taking these films, the Pathé brothers who were distributing them were taking them by ship to Australia. And they stopped by in Bombay just for a few days to show these films, and in a beautiful old hotel called Watson's Hotel. And the Indians were sort of like, they just took to this new medium which no one had seen before. I mean, it was just invented at the time. And it said of the Indian reception to this film, the two early films, maybe many of you would have seen them. There were these two tiny short films called Workers Leaving the Factory, and the other one was L'arrivée du train, the arrival of the train. There were two short films by the Lumiere brothers. And it said that when this film was, when the arrival of the train, it's just the camera's at the side and the train is arriving at the railway station. And it said that when this film was shown in many countries around the world, because it was this exciting new medium of cinema that hadn't been seen, that people typically sort of jumped out of the way thinking the train will jump on them because it's shot on a low angle and the train is arriving. And because they'd never seen this medium before, they sort of jumped out of the way thinking it might jump onto the screen and jump onto their heads. But in India, they say they didn't turn a hair. They just sort of, looked at it like that. And the explanation given is that Indians were so used to a whole lot of very kind of mythological, wild stuff, fantastic stuff, that this was just one more fantasy in a different form. So we just sat there looking at it and didn't love the medium, but were not terrorized by it. Yeah. And so in India, our cinema has really grown from a very strong tradition of theatre and mythology, which already had a lot of song and dance in it, because a lot of the folk tradition comes from a lot of oral storytelling, so there's a lot of music and song in it. And because a lot of them kept traveling to different venues, they also had dances accompanying them. So when this art form grew, when cinema came, typically, as happened in many cultures, the cinema owners that staged plays actually filmed these plays and then got into making films, etc., etc. So this is why the Indian tradition has what is known as Bollywood. It's actually has this tradition of song and dance from the start of our cinema, and which has nothing to do whatsoever with Hollywood's musical, where it's just one genre, which actually really grew as a genre from the Great Depression, as a kind of antidote to the Great Depression in 1929, when the economy was really bad and people were out of jobs and starving and hungry. And this was kind of Hollywood's response to this Great Depression by having these happy, high energy, happy songs and dance. And the musical as a genre really took off from there. So it's a completely independent, indigenous growth of this art form. But to come back to my starting point of Berlin, so I was really not sure, because it's seen as a kind of popular semi-lowbrow, very non-intellectual, songs and dance. So people are having a conversation in the film and suddenly burst into song and dance without a connection or without a reason or an excuse, and they're suddenly dancing in Switzerland. And I wasn't sure how they would respond in Berlin, because I really would have liked that Bollywood is seen as well with an open mind. And I wasn't sure how it would be received. And in fact, one of the early directors who came here, his name is Sanjay Leela Bhansali, and his film was called Hum Dil De Chuke Sana, which is sort of like, sorry, but I've already given away my heart, kind of. It's a bad translation, but something like that. And when he came, he was sort of puffing cigarettes. He was so nervous. It had also kind of a late night slot, like a 9:30-ish ending at midnight kind of slot. So it wasn't the main audience, because we thought maybe a more experimental audience might be open to it, or late night, they're open to some funky stuff. And it was a solid full house. I was sitting on the carpet myself and had a long Q&A, and he was like so dazzled. He didn't know what hit him. He said, why are these guys taking me so seriously? He couldn't imagine that he was really treated with respect and not some kind of, brainless Bolly trash, as a lot of people do outside of our film culture that don't understand it. So starting off from there, then quite early on, another film was another very famous director called Mani Ratnam, who had a film called Dil Se, von Herzen is the German title, From the Heart, which was actually a political film set in the Northeast, also having a love angle to it and so on. Very successful. And one of the most thrilling things about that movie for me is that, I don't know if any of you have seen it, it actually opens, the opening shot of that film is one of the most spectacular for me in all world cinema. It opens with a song and dance on the top of a running train with this really sexy woman These songs are sort of called item numbers in India when they're just sexy, wonderful, high protein, high energy dances by themselves. They don't necessarily have a connection to the rest of the story. But this one's just so wonderfully shot. It just has such wonderful energy. You can see the craftsmanship of it. I mean, you can't shoot a whole song with the woman dancing on the top of a running train unless you're really skilled. I mean, the cinematographer, the dancer, everyone. And then there were, shots in and out of tunnels for spectacular light. It was really marvelous. And actually, one of the things I love to do when I teach my students in Bombay is to have this song go side by side with, what is that movie? Can you remind me the title of the Lars von Trier film? Do you know the one I mean? Where this woman is convicted. She's turning blind, and she goes to America and she's Dance in the Dark, exactly. So there's a sequence there where it's a kind of very ensemble dance where there's like maybe 15 or 20 dancers on a train again. It's a moving train, very slowly moving train, doesn't count. But it's a kind of flat, like a goods train. It's not a regular passenger train. So it's flat spaces, and they're dancing on the train, but it's just moving gently. And I don't know, in some of those sequences he had like 100 cameras, so he's got the gizmos to do it. And sure, I acknowledge his craftsmanship, but it's very interesting to see how a Western culture and Bollywood would picturize the similar idea of having ensemble dances on the train. And if you see it side by side, I mean, I don't want to tell you what I thought of it. I'd rather that you figure out what you thought of it. That's more interesting to me. And so it's been a kind of long journey over the last 10 years. And I think what's important to me is that Bollywood also opened up spaces for other kinds of cinema, I feel. There's a lot of art house directors in India feel really threatened, and they think, because they're really sensitive ones, which don't have big stars and big song and dance at all, just have, very quiet and sensitive stories. They find it very hard to get distribution in India, very hard to get out into the world. And they're really annoyed because they feel that the film festivals are sort of the last past show on this planet where they can actually get seen at all. And hopefully if they get selected at, say, Cannes, Berlin, or Venice, then they find a distributor in India following that. And when Bollywood gets in on those spaces, they feel it's really like that tough, like this tiny little cabbage patch I have, and they feel Bollywood is encroaching, and they get really balshy about it. But I have to say that there is a mixed argument for that. I have to say that, a lot of people that would go to see a Bollywood film might also maybe checking out the others, whereas I think the reverse is not so true necessarily, because art house films typically in the world have a much more niche audience than mainstream. But it's very nice now in the last decade or so. There's been a lot of mucking about between these genres, and it's really nice. So a lot of Bollywood films are getting more thoughtful and sensitive, and a lot of art house films are intelligently using song and dance to reach out to wide audiences. So there's a really nice kind of middle of the road genre that's getting there, and I think that's really healthy. And for me, what is to look at where it's gotten now. Like this year we had Aamir Khan, who's one of 3 big Bollywood stars, who's on the international jury in Berlin. He doesn't have quite the same resonances, I think, as Shah Rukh Khan has here, because when Shah Rukh Khan comes here, I mean, I've seen those, all these police cars with lights and cordons and thousands of cops crawling, blocking of, whole neighborhoods around, and which restaurant is he going to have dinner at? And, then that area has to be blocked and stuff like that. So it's very thrilling for me. And what was really interesting is, for example, at the Om Shanti Om screening here, it was at the Kino International, because when they were programming, they knew they couldn't put it in one of those tiny little Cinemax things at Port Summer Place. It would just never be enough. So they had to choose one of the big theaters in former East Berlin. And Kino has at least more than 1,000 seats. And I saw the new Bollywood film, which is just opened in this Berlinale at the Friedrichstadtpalast, which is 1,900 seats, which is a fantastic grand theater. It's a kind of theater we don't hardly have in India anymore. I don't remember ever seeing such a big theater in India in my life. I mean, the biggest one we had in Bombay is like about 1,000 seats, maybe 1,100. But this is just fantastic. It's quite hard to fill up a theater like that unless you have really a big vehicle, a star vehicle that has audiences. But also, among the audiences that came to see these films were not just Germans, they were Swiss, they were French. I mean, I got talking to them because I wanted to have a sense of what draws them to these films. And there were like giggling gaggles of Polish teenagers. I mean, dozens and dozens of them. And when I met them, they had, for example, they'd seen like, one of them I was talking to had seen like 15 Shah Rukh Khan films, which is telling me awful films that even I didn't even know he'd done, because this was in his early days, soon after he did TV. I mean, really shitty films. what? 1, 2 ka 4 or some random stuff like that. I thought, what? And she not only seen them, she could actually remember the titles. These are titles in Hindi, a language she doesn't know. But she memorized all the titles because she adored him so much, and she like rattled off 15 titles. I couldn't offhand if you remember 15 titles if you just grabbed me off the top of your head, but she'd actually seen them and loved them, and it was like, oh, what are these Polish kids doing about it? And they had like planned this in a kind of military exercise because there were like 40 of them, and they had to figure out which hostels they could live in Berlin because they were on a really studenty budget. And they got a whole lot of gas balloons, huge, hundreds of them in the colors of the Indian flag in orange and white and green. They had this big flag called saying Kahami SRK, we love you, Shah Rukh Khan. And this really took a lot of planning, and they kept their spies at the end of the lane in case the cops shoo them off, and it was just very thrilling. And actually, Shah Rukh, everybody kept asking him, why is it you have all these fans in like Germany? Because usually the connection we usually have is what we call NRI communities, non-resident Indians. So it's like whole bunches of Indians that live in the UK or the US, which are its natural audience overseas. But these were clear. I mean, at that Kino International show, there were like 2 Indians, me, and I was one of them, and I think the consul's wife or someone. But otherwise, everyone was blonde, was German, was Swiss, was French, and Polish. And I couldn't get it. And everyone kept interviewing Shah Rukh Khan saying, why do you think they love you? And he said, I don't know. I keep asking them why they love me. And finally, I think he sort of reflected on, he had a very nice description. He said, in the West, you have it was really quite a charming quote. He said, I think in the West, you have a button for everything. You have a button to go up in the elevator. You have a button to make orange juice. You have a button for whatever. He says, I think I'm their button to cry. And I thought was so beautifully put, because I think one of the things that Bollywood offers its audience is melodrama as a kind of escapist melodrama, but also from the little that I know, that German films don't really give you that kind of space, whereas you could really, if you were seeing a Bollywood film, you could really technically quite, howl and honk into your kerchief or laugh your head off, or really be free to let those emotions surface, which otherwise you might not really, you might feel a bit inhibited perhaps, or not feel like expressing them. And this is like, so for me the most thrilling thing at the end of this Om Shanti Om, oh my God, it's a sight I'll remember till I die. So like there's this title song of Om Shanti Om that comes in at the end, over the end credits, and Shah Rukh Khan had already come at the beginning of the film and said, hello everybody, and everyone screamed, and he said, okay, I'm going to come back at the end of the film. So they knew he was coming back. So while these end credits were going on, so nobody would leave the theater because they knew this big star was coming back. But I saw this sight I've never seen in India. Every single person, this was like about 1,200 people in the theater, everybody stood up and was dancing in the aisles all through the length of the film, and just a wonderful energy. And this I've never seen in India. Like nobody actually sort of dances through the length of it. We respond in a different way. And just to give you also how these resonances cut across other cultures. So, for example, some of you might know this Australian director called Baz Luhrmann, who made Romeo and Juliet, for example, who's made loads of films after. And he made Moulin Rouge, which is the big one that went to Cannes. And he once wrote that he had once visited India, and he went to the state of Rajasthan and wrote that he went to an ice cream palace of a cinema, one of those big halls that look like a wedding cake. And he said there was a regular Bollywood film there, and the audience was relating it to the film with so much intensity. He said they knew a lot of the dialogues, they knew a lot of the songs. He said they were chatting and on the mobile during the film, and that didn't seem to him, in a way, it didn't seem disrespectful as it might be in the West, but just one more way to engage with the audience. And he said that kind of intensity of a kind of really an interactivity that the film seemed to have, that the audience had with the film. He said for him that was a seminal moment in his understanding of cinema and how it relates to audiences. And he said he tried to recreate that interactivity in Moulin Rouge. Yeah, so you see how it was completely over the top and melodramatic and zillions of colors and really, really, really quite hysterical a lot of the time. And this was a kind of feeling that he was trying to evoke, actually. So it's, for me, quite interesting. And just to maybe bookend this, the current thing. Actually, now we have this big Bollywood film that opened, in fact, had its world premiere here in Berlin even before in India. It's this latest film by Vishal Bhardwaj, who's one of our finest, most gifted directors. What I like about him, he's hardcore Bollywood, but he's really intellectual Bollywood. He's adapted a lot of Shakespeare classics in Bollywood. In fact, his earlier film called Maqbool was here in Berlinale in 2006 or so. It's an adaptation of Macbeth. Really, really, really wonderful. I mean, what's fantastic is he's not only places it in this really in the song and dance culture, but he has a kind of organic way of incorporating those songs and dance. There are never item numbers in his films, but he really brings rich layers of his own, which weren't there in the original Shakespeare. He brings all kinds of sexual tensions and jealousies that weren't in the original, and he just brings a real gravitas to it. So it's wonderful how he's enriching the vocabulary of Bollywood in a way. And his latest film he has called Saat Khun Maaf, the English translation is Seven Sins Forgiven, which played at a Friedrichstadtspalast. It's about a woman called Susanna. It's based on the tiny novella on a woman, Susanna, who married 7 husbands and killed all of them. And I think you should really go and check out this film. I'm very curious how it will be accepted at a larger public other than the Berlinale audience, because I suppose I could reveal it now because the film is out. The 7th husband is actually Jesus Christ. And it's like, it's big time provocative. And his reason for putting that was really interesting. Actually, he had an American screenwriter who actually co-wrote the screenplay, a very talented writer-director called Matthew Robbins. And when they were chatting about who could the 7th husband be, Susanna actually is looking for love all the time, which is why she marries these guys, and because they're really creepoids, and she bumps them off. And then, because she's still hungering for love, at some point in their conversation, Matthew said, "How about us making her a nun?" And he said, "That's weird." He said, "Why?" He said that in Christianity, when a woman becomes a nun, it's metaphorically that she's marrying Jesus Christ. And he said, "Oh, I didn't know that. I mean, we just thought it's becoming a nun." But Vishal, the director, didn't know that this was the resonance that it has in Christian religion. And he said, "That's really interesting. So why don't we do that and go ahead and make her a nun? Because then she's marrying somebody who's already dead." So that was like a brilliant cop-out, because she doesn't have to kill him. He's dead to begin with. But there's this masterly climax scene, which I think is one of the glorious points of Indian film. I don't know if I should spoil for you. Shall I tell you, or are you likely to see it and I shouldn't tell? Shall I tell you? So it's the scene where to me, really one of the greatest moments in cinema are those without words. And there's a scene where Susanna, who's dressed in a kind of long robe, is dancing with Jesus Christ, who clearly looks like Jesus Christ. I mean, he's got this long hair and beard and thorns, and it's unmistakably Jesus Christ, who's also in a long white robe. And what's incredible about that scene, they're both doing this, the Sufi dervish, the Sufi dervish whirling. And there's just like some quiet music at the back, but they're both, it's this kind of this gesture, and they're just swirling. Sorry, I can't swirl because of this nasty mic, but you get the picture. So they're both just dancing in this very quietly, darkly lit room. I think there's kind of stained glass at the back, but they're just whirling independently, but in this room. And it's just an extraordinary moment, because for me, it's really uniting the two great religions of the world. And it's for me uniting the most precious things about these two religions, the spirituality, the asceticism, it's really a scene of redemption. There is really also somehow for me compassion in that scene, and to not have a word. There's not a word, so it's whatever that scene says for you. It's everyone makes of it what they will. So it's a very, very richly resonant and powerful image for me, and the idea of Christ and a nun doing Sufi dervish dances is for me really extraordinary. I mean, I can't think of a more powerful image in cinema in a long time. We wait to see how the film is. I mean, it's already released now. So in Berlin, they had the world premiere at the Friedrichstadtspalast, and he was so relieved because he got a long ovation and a very warm response. And he was very relieved, and he was wondering if they would kill him because he didn't know. I mean, this is more technically more Christian country than India is. I know. Hardly ever anyone goes to church, etc., etc. I know all of that, but technically, I said. So he wasn't sure what the response might be. People might find it too provocative, etc., etc. But it went off really well, and people really took to the whole film. They weren't unduly provoked by this one scene. So he felt very good going back to India immediately the next day for its worldwide release. So I don't know what kind of response it really has because I've been here through. But for me, so it's had a really long journey of Bollywood from what it originally started off and where it's moved. And I just briefly round off quickly so we can chat more informally with questions. For me, this is really special because I think those of you who live in Berlin will probably know that Shah Rukh Khan was shooting here for a film called Dawn 2 for like 3 months with his star Priyanka Chopra, who's also the star of Seven Sins Forgiven. With a lot of support, it's a lot of sort of, I don't know if it's formally an Indo-German co-production, but it's got certainly a huge support from the Berlin Brandenburg Media something Forum, which is the film commission and its film funding arm. They gave it incredible amount of support. 3 months is a very long time for Bollywood, and really expensive, and they supported it really huge. So for me, it's a very nice thing that our cultures are coming together through film. And it's very interesting for me to look at the whole arc that this has taken from 1925, which was when we had the first Indo-German co-production. Maybe some of you are aware, we had this wonderful film called Light of Asia. My German's pretty hopeless. I think Leuchte der Asien, something like that, by a very, very gifted German director called Franz Osten. A silent film, of course, on the life of Buddha. So it was very interesting because at that time, film was quite strong. In Berlin was the kind of capital of European filmmaking, but it still seemed to want to be the big rival to Hollywood, which is still the big center of world cinema. And one of the ways it tried to reach out and have a global audience is by trying to look for subjects that might have a larger resonance in other cultures. And they thought of India and spirituality, and they thought of the life of Gautam Buddha, and this was the subject of the film. And there was a very gifted Bengali playwright called Niranjan Pal, who actually went to England to study playwriting, who got together with another guy and they wrote out this film. And they somehow met the producers from this company called Emelka Films of Munich that eventually produced the film with Great Eastern Films from India. And they produced this film, and it was such a hit all over the world. This was a film that traveled all over the world. In England, it had a special screening for, I think at the time it was King George V and Queen Mary. It had like a command performance for the royalty, and then it was shown in the public. Then it was shown in Japan. I can't remember. I think it was Emperor Hirohito. It had all these royal shows and then went out to the public, so it had really kind of cachet of being accepted by those cultures and being officially welcomed. It did really good business, not so much in India, but it did very good business here in Germany, in Europe, and which is why they made 2 more films. So it actually became a kind of trilogy that he made at the time, all 3 directed by Franz Osten, who made 14 or 15 films, hardcore Bollywood films later, and without knowing a word of Hindi. I find this astonishing, really gifted. And he was apparently a guy who would, when somebody read out the lines, he'd say, "Can you find another word? It doesn't sound right to me." So he didn't actually know the language, but he had this incredible instinct to get a sense of what the dialogue must mean. And I thought that astonishing. So, of course, typically they were looking at films that would have spirituality and sex and Maharajas and elephants and horses and whatnot. And these 3 films had loads of those. The first film was Light of Asia on the life of Gautam Buddha. The second one was called Shiraz in 1927. The third was called A Throw of Dice. I think I know that word. Die Schicksalswürfel, something like that. Very nice. Complicated, rubbishy story. Some random film love triangle with an architect in love with somebody who's building the Taj Mahal and some queen and princess, and just really an excuse, I think, to show a lot of royalty. And he actually collaborated with these, with the kings, or the king of Jodhpur, for example, and who lent all his horses and, elephants and palace for the shoot. So these 3 are quite extraordinary films. And then, of course, he went on to make, like I said, 14 films in Hindi. And the songs from his films, which he made in, for example, 1939 or 36, called Achyut Kanna, which is on a love story based on untouchability. And my mother still sings the songs, and I still know the songs. So for me, it's extraordinary that in 2011, I can sing the songs of what Franz Osten directed in 1936, and they still have a resonance in India. And I think that's really special. So I think films are a very powerful way to connect cultures. And just to give you a sort of counterpoint example, now actually officially, Bollywood is officially part of the Ministry of External Affairs, part of its diplomacy. You wouldn't have thought of it maybe 10 years ago, but now they give you Bollywood music tapes and stuff as part of their what's called XP, External Publicity Division. So they're sort of also willing to muck their hands with this popular stuff. But, films have always been known as a vehicle for kind of soft diplomacy. And to give an example of how powerful films are, as a contrast from the Bollywood example. So, for example, the Motion Picture Association of America, whose head was Jack Valenti for many years, when they went to, for example, a country like Korea, when they were expanding, films were actually seen as a vehicle for expanding economic relations and expanding industry. So, whereas actually America wanted to have a tie-up, was supposed to have sign a deal with Korea's steel and mines and railway lines, and they wanted it on their terms, which the Koreans didn't agree to. Jack Valenti insisted, he was only the film guy, but to give you a sense of how important film is in the overall scheme of things in politics and diplomacy. In those days, Hollywood has, of course, as it's destroyed national cinemas worldwide, also in Korea. So the Koreans had a quota system. They had something like 133 days reserved in their theaters for Korean films. And Jack Valenti said, you got to shut down those quotas, and only then we signed the deal for steel and mines. I mean, look at that. He was connecting a film quota. He insisted they open up their film market to Hollywood as conditional to a steel and mines contract from the industry minister of America and Korea. I mean, it's that powerful. I mean, it's not like, just something you go and look at in the movies, but it's really far, far more powerful than you and I might imagine, because it's really the vehicle for a lot of industrial, economic, and diplomatic equations between countries. I think I'll wrap up here. I'd rather take questions and see how it goes. Yeah? Thank you very much. Thank you.